this video, we will be replacing the rear brake pads and rotors in this 2012 Ford F150. To prep this vehicle, I do have wheel chocks in front of the front tires. I have the rear tires lifted off of the ground just slightly, and I have supported the rear of the vehicle with safety stands. With a 22mm socket, we can remove our lug nuts. This tire has been on for quite a while, so it did require a little persuasion from the backside to loosen it up. And once that is off, we can move that out of the way. And taking a look at our assembly, we can see our rotor. This is a drum in hat rotor. We can also see our brake caliper. And inside that brake caliper, we have our brake pads. On our caliper, we have 2 caliper bolts. We're going to apply some Amsoil metal protector to aid in the removal of these bolts. And both of these bolts are 13mm. And we can then work that caliper off. And that can be set on that leaf spring. We can then pull out those brake pads, and we can then work that brake hardware off. On the back of our system, we have 2 caliper mounting bracket bolts that need to be removed next. We are again going to spray some Amsoil metal protector to aid in the removal of these bolts. And these are 18mm bolts. And that bracket can slide off. And our next objective is to attempt to work off that rotor. Best case scenario, you will be able to work that off without much persuasion. More than likely, it is held on by the parking brake shoes on the inside of the drum, and we will need to adjust those slightly. Now I am going to rotate this slightly and listen to hear how much this is dragging, because as we adjust this, we will need to readjust this back with our new rotor. And if we move back to the rear side of that assembly, we can see a small rubber plug located towards the bottom, and using a standard head screwdriver, we can remove that plug. And on this passenger side, we want to use a standard head screwdriver to push the star wheel downward. This will adjust those parking brake pads and release some of the pressure off of that drum. After having adjusted that, when I rotate the rotor, I can hear virtually no drag. And then I can again attempt to work that off. So that's still on there pretty good. We will apply some Amsoil metal protector to each of the stud locations. If this is seized onto the hub, this will hopefully work through that rust. And similar to the removal of the wheel, I'm going to give a little persuasion from the back and see if this can help. And that seemed to do the trick. Now we do want to inspect the parking brake components. This includes the lining as well as any of the springs behind it. I see no broken parts, and the lining is still in good shape, so we will not be replacing that as a part of this repair. If we take a look at the star wheel, this is towards the bottom. This is what I adjusted to bring those brake pads in a little bit. We can see what that looks like, and using a standard head screwdriver did do the trick in adjusting that. And our next task is to clean the entire braking system with Amsoil brake and parts cleaner. This will remove any of the brake dust and clean up all of those components. You will want a drip pan underneath this. And then using a piece of cardboard and some Amsoil heavy duty metal protector, I am going to coat that center hub to prevent it from rusting onto the wheel in the future. And while at the vehicle, I'm going to go ahead and prep our caliper for putting this all back together. Now I'm first going to locate the bleed screw on the caliper, and I'm going to locate a drill bit that I can put the shank of the drill bit perfectly into the orifice of that bleed screw. This one is a 1/8 inch drill bit, and a little Amsoil metal protector on that will aid in the removal. So at this point I have my 1/8 inch drill bit and my 11mm tubing wrench. These are the components that I need for loosening that bleed screw, but because that is not bolted onto the vehicle, it will just move around. So I'm going to wait until I have that caliper mounting bracket installed on the vehicle to open up this bleed screw. So I'm going to shift my focus back to the bench and first take a look at my new rotor, and I am going to clean both surfaces, front and back, with Amsoil brake parts cleaner. This will remove the oil that is coated on these when they are shipped. And it is worth noting that with these particular rotors, there is a difference between the driver's side and passenger side, so you will want to double check that to make sure you are installing the correct one. With our rotor all ready to go, we want to look at our brake caliper mounting bracket, and using some Amsoil brake and parts cleaner and a wire brush, we can clean off the location for our brake hardware. And we then want to remove our guide pins. It is worth noting this one has a plastic insert on it. We will want to install that back on the same side. We can clean off all that old grease and apply some new Permatex Ultra Brake Parts lubricant to our boots, as well as our guide pins. And we can work that pin back in place. And the same process for the other side. And we have our new brake pads and hardware. And we'll put a little brake parts lubricant on our hardware location as well, and install that hardware. And this is done for the other side as well. And that hardware is designed to fit on there snug. And we can then install our rotor, as well as our caliper mounting bracket. And once again, just to double check that I do have the correct rotor on for this particular type of rotor, we can compare this to our directions. The wheel rotation is clockwise, and our drill marks and slots are rotating as identified by the directions. And we can use an 18mm socket and torque those caliper mounting bracket bolts to 111 foot-pounds. And at this point I'm going to temporarily install my caliper with the caliper bolts, just a few turns. And then I'm going to install the shank of that drill bit into the opening of that bleed screw, as well as my 11mm tubing wrench. And my goal is just to loosen this a little bit until it starts moving. and then I can remove that caliper again. And if we take a look at the caliper as a unit, we can see our caliper piston as well as the boot around the piston. Our objective is to push the piston back into the caliper, but we do not want the contaminated, dirty brake fluid pushing itself back through the braking system. So as we depress the piston, we want that bleed screw open so that we can push out the dirty brake fluid rather than pushing that back through the system. I will be using a caliper piston reset tool. You could also do this with one of your old brake pads and a C-clamp. And with that bleed screw loose, we can compress that piston back into its original position. And this will release any contaminated brake fluid that is sitting inside the caliper. And then we want to retighten that bleed screw. Now we will need to bleed these at the end of this entire process. Just keep that in mind for later. And with our caliper piston reset, we can install our new brake pads. I am going to apply just a little bit of brake parts lubricant to the ears of the brake pad before I install them. And the idea is we do have a metal on metal surface that we are hoping to minimize any type of squeaking. And then we can install our caliper. And those 13mm bolts are torqued to 24 foot-pounds. With my components back together, I want to go back and readjust that parking brake. To do this, I will install the lug nuts to simulate the wheel being on. I'm going to rotate the tire, and I'm going to listen for the point at which it is barely touching, because we don't want our parking brake to be rubbing on our new rotor. And then I can replace that dust boot. And then I do like to come back with some Amsoil brake and parts cleaner, because I probably touched the surface of the rotor as I installed it. And I'm also going to use some Amsoil heavy duty metal protector to coat the top of the rotor. I do not want this on the surface of the rotor that the pad touches, but rather just the surface where our wheel assembly will be connected. I also want to bleed the brake since I did have that bleed screw open. I am using a brake bleed tool to aid in this process. And the last thing that we want to do before putting the wheel back on is to step on the brake pedal a couple times and reset that caliper piston. And you will want to check the brake fluid reservoir, as we did lose some brake fluid during this process.